You are now listening to the Vegan Stuff podcast with Caavakushi.
Hosting this podcast today are our two AI hosts, Sam and Kim. If you simply can't get enough of us, go to caavakushi.com and sign up for our vegan newsletter and get our free 7-day high-protein vegan meal plan. And we also have some good news. We will be releasing our first ever cookbook pretty soon, so stay tuned. Hey, don't forget to follow us on our socials too.
Welcome to another deep dive. Today we're going to be exploring a connection that you might not expect. We're going to be talking about Donald Trump and veganism. Yeah, you heard that right. We've got some fascinating articles here. We've got plant-based news. We've got stuff from PETA, even The Independent.
Sounds like a wild ride.
Yeah, it is. So to set the stage, let's go back to 2019. Okay, so picture this. President Trump is in office, and he gets this challenge from the $1 Million Vegan Charity. They said if he goes vegan for just 30 days, they'll donate $1 million to a veterans charity. $1 million, right? You'd think that'd be a pretty tempting offer.
Yeah, especially for someone who likes to win.
Exactly. But here's where it gets interesting. Trump reportedly refused. And the reason he gave, well, it's kind of mind-boggling. He's quoted as saying that going vegan would, and I quote, mess with your body chemistry, your brain.
Wow.
I know, right? He even allegedly said, if I lose even one brain cell, we're flaked. Now, it's worth noting that this quote comes from Stephanie Grisham's book. She was his press secretary, so, take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah, there's definitely that he said, she said element to it.
For sure, but even as an anecdote, it raises a lot of questions. Like, is there any truth to the idea that veganism can harm your brain? And, what does this whole situation tell us about how veganism is perceived, especially by someone like Donald Trump?
Well, one thing that really struck me about this story was who actually issued the challenge. It wasn't some, political rival or a celebrity trying to get attention. This challenge came from a 9-year-old activist named Vegan Evan.
Oh, yeah, Vegan Evan. I remember him. He even said he wanted to run for president in 2048.
Exactly. It really shows you how younger generations are really becoming a force in the vegan movement. They're not afraid to challenge people in power and speak their minds.
Yeah, no kidding. All right, so let's get back to Trump's claim. He seemed really worried about losing brain cells on a vegan diet. Is there any scientific basis for that?
Not really. The plant-based news article we have actually mentions a couple of neurologists, Doctors Aisha and Dean Sherzai. They specialize in Alzheimer's prevention at Loma Linda University. And they're very clear. There's no evidence that going vegan harms your brain.
Okay, but for those of us who aren't neurologists, can you break down what Alzheimer's prevention actually means?
Basically, it's about making lifestyle choices to lower your risk of getting Alzheimer's, which is a type of dementia that affects, your memory and how well your brain works. And the research suggests that a well-planned vegan diet can actually protect your brain as you get older.
So it's not about suddenly becoming a genius overnight. It's about long-term brain health.
Exactly. And, when Trump talked about body chemistry, he was probably thinking about how what you eat can mess with your hormones or your overall balance, But there's no evidence that a vegan diet throws things out of whack like that. Actually, research shows that a diet with lots of processed meats, red meat, saturated fats, that's what's linked to a higher risk of things like heart disease, diabetes, even cognitive decline.
Oh, wow. Kind of ironic considering some of Trump's favorite foods, right?
Yeah, a little bit. It seems like his claim was based on, a misunderstanding of what veganism actually does to your body.
Totally. It highlights how important it is to get information from reliable sources, not just, base your decisions on fear or rumors.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay, so fast forward to 2024. And this is where things get really interesting. Remember how Trump was, at one point, thinking about trying vegan food at a rally?
Oh, yeah.
Well, PETA, the animal rights organization, they saw an opportunity. They sent him this whole care package full of vegan goodies. I mean, we're talking vegan chicken, burgers, jerky, all kinds of stuff. And get this, they even sent him Oreos. And if you remember, Trump had this whole thing about boycotting Oreos a while back. So it was kind of a brilliant move by PETA, you got to admit.
Yeah, that's pretty clever.
Right. So I'm curious, what do you think of PETA's strategy here? Some people might say that engaging with someone like Trump just gives them more attention, good or bad.
I see that point. It's a risk for sure. But PETA's known for their attention-grabbing tactics, even if they're controversial. By going after Trump specifically, who's famous for what he eats, They were definitely trying to start a conversation and maybe even change his mind. Whether it worked or not, who knows?
Right. Okay, so we've got Trump, veganism, brain cells, and PETA all mixed up in this really weird story. But I want to know, how did all this play out in the media? What was the public reaction like?
Well, it was pretty much what you'd expect. A mix of opinions. Some people loved what PETA did, others hated it. Social media went crazy, of course. But the important thing is, it did add to the bigger conversation about veganism.
You mentioned that veganism's getting more mainstream, but is that always a good thing? Could it end up watering down the movement's message?
That's a good question. It's something that's being debated within the vegan community itself. As it gets more popular, there's a risk that it just becomes another way for corporations to make money instead of actually caring about animal rights. But at the same time, when vegan options are more accessible, more people can try them and maybe make more compassionate choices. It's a complicated issue.
It is, yeah. A lot to unpack there. But we got to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll dive deeper into how this whole Trump and veganism thing reflects the state of the movement today. And we'll explore what the future might hold for veganism in a world that's, well, let's face it, pretty obsessed with food and politics. Stay with us.
Did you know we have a vegan search engine, a vegan forum, a vegan newsletter, and so much more coming soon? So why not check us out at Caavakushi.com.
Yeah, it's a tough balance. You've got activists really pushing for change, fighting for animal rights, and then you've got this whole other group, people who are into veganism for their health or the environment, or maybe they're just curious.
And those two sides don't always agree.
Yeah, there can be some tension. Some activists think that focusing on what people buy lets the big companies off the hook, and then some people who are trying to eat less meat might find the activist message a bit too much.
Yeah, I can see that. But it seems like both sides ultimately want the same thing, a food system that's more fair and compassionate.
Ideally, yeah. They're just coming at it from different angles.
Okay, so regardless of how you feel about veganism, it's clearly having a big impact. We're seeing more vegan options everywhere, restaurants, grocery stores, even celebrities are getting into it.
Oh, absolutely. And it's not just in the US, it's global. Veganism isn't this niche thing anymore. It's becoming normal.
That's pretty wild when you think about it. Hey, remember that what-if scenario we talked about before? What if Trump had actually gone vegan for those 30 days? How do you think that would change how people see veganism, especially his supporters?
Man, that's a fun one to think about. Can you imagine the headlines? Trump goes vegan. It would have been nuts. Some of his supporters might have thought, hey, maybe I should try that. But others probably would have felt like he was betraying them.
It could have become this whole other culture war thing, like suddenly whether you eat meat or not is a political statement.
Yeah, totally. And that's the sad part. Food shouldn't be about politics.
I agree. But food choices are definitely getting more political these days. Just look at the debates about GMOs, organic food, even raw milk.
It's true. People get so caught up in their beliefs, they forget about the science. And with someone like Trump, who's so polarizing, vegan Trump would have just made things more divided, for sure.
Okay, so let's put the whole Trump thing aside for a minute. What does this whole saga say about veganism today? You said it's going mainstream, but what does that really mean?
I think it means it's becoming more approachable. You don't have to be like a hardcore activist to be vegan. You can just eat more plant-based meals or pick the vegan option at a restaurant if you want to.
Yeah. It's more about making choices you feel good about, not trying to be perfect.
Exactly. And the food technology is getting so good. Plant-based meat, cheese, milk, all of it. Some of it's so close to the real thing, it's crazy.
I know, right? I had a plant-based burger the other day that was amazing. I literally had to check the label to make sure it was vegan.
That's the future, I think. Plus, you can't ignore the climate change issue and how much animal agriculture impacts the environment. So the sustainability side of veganism is getting more important too.
It's more than just about animals now. It's about the planet.
Right. It's like a win-win. You help the planet and maybe even feel healthier too.
So what's next for veganism? Where do you see things going?
I think we're about to see a huge shift in how we think about food and how we eat. There's going to be more innovation, more companies making plant-based stuff, and more people going vegan, whether it's for ethical reasons or environmental or health, all of it.
It makes you wonder how politics will be affected by all this. Will we see politicians actually campaigning on a vegan platform?
It'll be a mix, I bet. Some politicians will see how popular veganism is getting and try to get those votes. But others will stick to their old ways, even if it means ignoring a big part of the population. Especially as younger people get more into politics and they seem more open to plant-based diets.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to watch how that unfolds. Okay, so we've covered a lot. We talked about Trump's fear of brain damage, the future of food, all kinds of stuff. But before we finish up, I want to go back to the human side of this whole thing. Because when I think about this whole Trump and veganism story, it really shows how personal our food choices are. It goes beyond just what we put in our mouths. It's tied to our values, what we believe in, even our identity. Food is such a big part of our cultures, our traditions, our families.
That's so true. It makes sense why people get so worked up when you talk about food. We're not just talking about calories, we're talking about things that are really important to us, about who we are.
And when you add politics to the mix, like we saw with the whole Trump thing, it can get really intense. Suddenly, a meal becomes this statement about your political views.
It's just like everything else these days, right? So divided. Food's become another battle in the culture war, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's a bummer. So how do we have these conversations about food and politics without making each other angry? Can we find common ground, even if we eat totally differently?
It comes down to empathy and respect, I think. We have to listen to each other, even when we disagree. And remember that everyone has their own food journey, their own reasons for eating the way they do. What works for one person might not work for another.
It's about standing up for what you believe in, but also being open to other people's ideas, which is, harder than it sounds.
It takes work, for sure. But we need to get past this us versus them thing with food. We need to find solutions that work for everybody and maybe even laugh a little at how crazy it all is.
Yeah, right. Like, who would have thought we'd be talking about Donald Trump and veganism in the same breath? Such a weird combo, but it's made for a really interesting conversation.
It just goes to show the most unexpected things can make us rethink the world.
Well, that's our deep dive into the strange world of Donald Trump and veganism. We talked about the science, the politics, the culture, the whole shebang. We learned that veganism is growing, food and politics are inseparable, and that even crazy scenarios like this can make us think about what we eat and why. So the next time you're at a dinner party and everyone's got different ideas about food, remember this conversation. Be curious, listen to people, and you might just find that common ground we're all looking for. Until next time, happy eating and keep on diving deep.
Thanks for listening. We hope you liked this episode. If you did, we'd really appreciate it if you could give us 5 stars on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on. Also, we would be so appreciative if you could just share this episode or this podcast with all your friends and family who are vegans or vegan friendly. We're also really excited because we are going to be launching something really cool pretty soon on the site, so keep an eye out for that. And we will see you really soon with a new episode.